Good afternoon, everyone, and to those of you who are joining from Sri Lanka, good evening. We are here together today for the second part of the session on group Kamma that we started last week, and this will be the final session today. I must acknowledge the fact that a lot of the material that we have for the presentation on group Kamma, there is so much of evidence and books that have been written on the subject, chapters dedicated towards the discussion, the topic of the concept of group Kamma, that everything has been simplified to sort of present it within the time frame available to all of us. After the session, we will be having time for question and answers. If you do have anything to ask, so let us start. So let us start by chanting Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. All right. I must mention before we start and go ahead, today's presentation or last week's presentation, the inclination was not in any way to speak on the political or socio-economic values of the topics that have been discussed. It is purely for the aspect of research and better understanding about how one's actions affect oneself, most importantly, but also society and the world that we live in. So that has been the intention behind presenting on such a topic, because you might at some point have doubts whether Bhante is going into politics. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So let us start the presentation. Right. So Kamma and justice. Why do we have both of these words together? The reason is, Kamma, when we take the Vinaya, is a way of measuring, or the way of a sign, a nimitta of sorts, or when the virtue has been broken, a transgression of a Vinaya offense has been made. So Kamma, within Buddhist literature, within Buddhist learning and study, has always been presented as a part of Buddhist justice. So in the monastic code, when we evaluate, when we ask the question, okay, at what point did I incur the transgression as a monk? For a monk, this can be a very, very important question, especially when it comes to the parajikas, the sanghadisesa, Vinaya offenses, because these are very severe Vinaya offenses for a monk or a nun. So Kamma and justice, all that we have discussed has no sort of true value or weight if it doesn't accrue or come down to the fact of justice. Down to the fact of justice. So let us see. The characteristics of Kamma is that we read this earlier, but because this part is also important for today's session, I'm going to read it again. Such can only be said that said to be relatively consonant when the action, but there is no real way of measuring it. There is an action, but there is no way of measuring it, right? Meaning, for example, if a surgeon is to conduct an operation with a team of nurses and other doctors, how do we accrue the praise or the blame when it comes to, if, of course, the surgery goes well, we would congratulate the surgeon, we would congratulate the team. However, if the surgery does not go according to plan, who do we put the blame on? Now, karmically, this is quite difficult to measure, for us at least, right? Karmic cause and effects do not occur singly or in a linear manner, but as a network of coefficient causes and effects. Now, this is a very important point, because you cannot single handedly just say, okay, this is big why the Kamma sort of, went on this way. There are many sort of aspects that gives a Kamma and a Kamma result. Kamma and a Kamma result, a Kamma vipaka. Karmic results will persist as long as the conditions that feed them persist, and often in turn become the condition for more Kamma. Also meaning, regardless of the fact whether you have done a lot of good in your past, if the present conditions are not present to allow for the booming or blooming rather of that Kamma, then the Kamma, although you have the good Kamma to experience such Kamma, you will not be experiencing the good Kamma. Why? Because the conditions are not present. A good example of this is the reason as to why Buddhism was delayed coming to Sri Lanka. Remember the story about how Venerable Mahinda, wasn't it? Venerable Mahinda, who postponed his coming to Sri Lanka because the king at the time in Sri Lanka, Venerable Mahinda, Arahant Mahinda, knew that he would not be someone who would praise or value the Dhamma. Hence, the Dhamma would not have spread. So he postponed his arrival in Sri Lanka. Remember the story? Now that is an example of this sentence here. Karmic results are not merely just desserts, but more often arise by way of creating and reinforcing one's latent tendencies of lust, aversion, and ignorance. Now, while we say reinforcing one's latent tendencies of lust, aversion, and ignorance, we can also say that lust, aversion, and ignorance further paves way for more like Kammas to arise, right? Like Kammas to arise, which can, when and if done by a ruler of the country or a person of power, can affect the whole country, right? An example that we might have is certain, I'm not going to quote names obviously for safety reasons, but certain constructions which have been conducted where the engineers have advised parties that 1/3 of the country's forests would have to be deforested to commission such a construction, hence not to go ahead with it, but the king, or rather, we'll use the word king. The king of the country decides, no, this is going to be my legacy, so I'm going to do it. Hence, putting the country's environment in great jeopardy just to uphold a person's ego, right? Now, these are examples of how, when done by a person who is influential and in power, be it a politician, be it a king or a queen, be it a monk or a pope, that this plays out in such a manner. Karmic results do not always have the same effect on the same person all the time. With spiritual training, for example, we'll be able to allow the fruition to pass without being adversely affected by it. Now, an example for this is found within the sutras. We speak about the benefits of metta and the benefits that come about by living a life of spirituality, meaning a life dedicated towards that which is wholesome. It is said that a person who cultivates his mind specifically with vibrations of metta and thoughts of loving kindness, he would be able to prevent the arising of unwholesome karmas done in the past, and also lessen the blow of karma in one's life. And this is, I personally believe this to be very, very true. Now, moving on. I hope you've got the gist of it, but I will also very happily share the presentation on the website for your further reading after the session ends. Now, what is this? This are types of group karma. So really drawing a consensus of what we have done last week, I have put this in. Types of group karma, just to recap on what we have gone through. The karma, so there are three, distinguishedly different from one another. The karma of a nation or group where all act in concert or are participants in the action and thus partake of its karmic effects. We went through the examples of Samavati. We went through many examples last time, if you remember. If you don't, you can revisit the talk that is now on YouTube. But this is the Kamma, the nation, which would be referred to as social Kamma or national Kamma, right? Which affects that group that participated in the Kamma. The Kamma that results when the king or other persons in authority act on behalf of the people. If the king or prime minister acts well, the karmic residues of such actions fall on the whole nation and it experiences peace, prosperity, and security. If the ruler does evil, then the whole nation suffers. A good example of this regard is the king of Bhutan, which I do not have to go further. You all know his life is now taken, and the way that he manages his country is taken as a prime example of great leadership, and most importantly, wholesome leadership, isn't it? Right? The king of Bhutan. The karma created by the rulers that allows the karma of the individual to work itself out. Right? Now, this is through legislation, through policy, through the spreading of kindness or even hate, whatever it is. The ruler makes the ambience of the country or determines the ambience of the country. And we have a lot of prime examples for this sort of thing in today's world. If the leader tends to be racist, the population takes after him. If the leader takes on to be sexist, the population takes after him. If the leader supports women's rights, the population takes after him. And we have so many examples of this sort in today's world and, of course, in history as well. So these are the three types of karma that we have gone through last week. So I have put down this slide. Now, aggregate and conglomerate. Now, this is a very important specification when it comes to understanding intention and action. Aggregate and conglomerate. What is this? Aggregate. An aggregate is simply the sum total of the individual members at any time. For example, the monks of a monastery, a group in meditation, students in a class, or a crowd at the beach. Right? Now, they are not formed together into a group in any way. However, they might be practicing similar things or being situated in a similar or a locality. Right? Aggregate refers to more the individual participation of a person. There is no collective goal formation, decision making, or corporate action. For example, an audience claps at the end of a performance or says sadhu sadhu at the end of a deshana, right? That common response is merely the sum result of individual actions. Now, you know, if we find ourselves at the Royal Albert Hall Theatre, and if you've gone for a show or a Broadway show or a ballet show or whatever it is, or if it is a Christmas seasonal proms, whatever, you know, throughout the presentation of dance, music, whatever it is, you remain pin drop silent, right? But at the end of the session, you applaud. You clap it. You might have not even liked it. You might have not even agreed with it. You might not agree with the fact that it was a well done performance. However, to show your appreciation, to go on with the setup of the gathering, you clap. Doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with it, but it is the way it is done, isn't it? Right? For example, if a person walks into your house and there are 4 people living in the house and all of you, you know, are in the living room or whatnot, and you accept this visitor, one person might not like the visitor, but because the visitor has come home, you be cordial. That is what having good manners is, isn't it? Right? Doesn't have to do with you accepting the views of the person or not. Now, this is aggregate, right? Then, conglomerate. Conglomerate does not consist entirely in or is not exhausted by the identities of a person that are associated with it, right? So it can be a greater body. right? And it's not exhaustible depending on the number of people or the individuals who form the conglomerate, right? A conglomerate has an internal structure for goal setting, decision making, and implementation. Now, for those of you who have worked for large organizations, large ones, right? Small organizations are rather different, because small organizations, you can see the result of the work that you do. If you're working for a large corporation, you might be doing one small task. You might not see the end result of it, right? You might not see the end result of it. Those of you who have worked in such organizations or have some sort of awareness over how these corporations work know this for sure, right? An implementation has a conglomerate has an internal structure for goal setting, decision making, and implementation. As such, it can have intentions to do things and be accountable for its actions. The monastery is lauded for instituting an order of nuns and building a nunnery for them, right? Now, each individual monk will not be a part of the process of decision making and building of the nunnery or the welcoming of the nuns. However, the institution itself sets the standard attitude and also the distinct clarification of what their belief is as a conglomerate, right? Not conglomerate, not in the business sense of it, conglomerate as a collection, right? The monastery is lauded for instituting an order of nuns and building a nunnery for them. The business is praised for its corporate concern for the environment. The government is responsible for invading, and occupying another country. Do you understand the context of it? Right? Now, let us move on. Right? Now, the problem with group Kamma arises when we come to the question of appropriation of accountability. Because within the notions of Kamma, we are taught and often we see the repetition of the idea that Kamma is borne by you in accordance with the actions that you perform, good or bad. That is the basic, distinct designation and purpose of Kamma, right? However, it should be understood the format through which, or the reason for which, the group Kamma concept has or is being spoken of and is now being introduced is because it is not essentially just about the appropriation of Kamma, but the appropriation of Kamma Vipaka is important, right? In the basics of Kamma. Now, can a group be held morally accountable for what it has done? Those who advocate group Kamma must maintain that the concept of an agent need not be restricted to individuals. Groups or organizations can act intentionally because they too are agents with belief, desires, and goals who consider alternative courses of action, and act to realize them. A common example of this is the concept of a legal person. Right, is a concept of a legal person. Now, in another way, we can take, if we take a small organization, right, relatively smaller than a huge conglomerate, right, we have the fact of setting the mindset of the employees, which is often done by the strategic management or the management of the organization. They set the passion that these individuals have often drip down to the other workers or employees who are part of that organization, right? Now, in smaller corporations who do very, very big tasks, they might, of course, be big in terms of capital and market share, but the size of the organization can be small, maybe. Right? For example, you have large hedge fund firms or capital investment firms that are not international, but are based in a locality, but they're quite huge and very well known, right? Same goes for legal firms, right? Now they can take up the ideas, the passion of the strategic management, and they can align themselves to that way of thought. Now, this is a very important part of group Kamma, because without the volition or volitional participation in the action, there is no way to say that you now deserve praise or punishment for the deed that one has committed, even though the deed has been committed by a collection of people, right? By a collection of people. Group purpose or personal responsibility. Reichenbach argument is, now the question is, how can a group have desires or purposes or perform acts? Very much in the same way that individuals do. Not every part of the individual is involved in goal setting or decision making. Example, the digestive system plays no direct role in such actions of decision making, though their activities may influence the processes of the digestive system, right? Processes of the digestive system, and are certainly necessary for the existence of the person who enacts the decision-making process. Rather, the person has an appropriate psychophysical structure that enables him to engage in the intentional actions. Now, that is food for thought, right? That is absolutely food for thought. Just as an individual may act morally or immorally, a corporation too may act responsibly or irresponsibly. For example, the rise and fall of Enron, right? If you remember that fiasco. Do you remember that fiasco? The rise and fall of Enron? Okay, that is something to Google, how the partners of the organization were all siphoning money out of it, and this huge corporation fell overnight, right? Many hundreds and thousands of employees lost their jobs overnight, and it is still sort of taken as case studies. Now, when it comes to personal responsibility, the volitional role that is played by an individual who is a part of that Kamma is important to be accounted for. Another example could be this. Now, when the bombings of the the Twin Towers, right? An example of that is taken. Now, the person who was with the terrorist organization, who drove the people who were getting on the flight, right? The person who drove them to the airport had no clue or idea that these guys were going to hijack the plane. Now, the conversation here is about Kamma. Does that person who did not know what is going to happen to the plane, or whether there was anything to happen with the plane, a part of that Kamma? There is no text or reasoning that we can come into a conclusion to say that that person plays a role in the act of bombing. Of course, in legal structures, this can be different. But in Kammic law, then that person, if the person is not volitionally connected to the action, which means that the person does not know, does not agree, does not disagree, right, with the action, meaning that person is separate from the action, then it is difficult to say that kammically that person will be apportioned blame or praise for anything, right? There must be a volitional connection to that. But is it then fair to say that ignorance is absolute bliss, right? That ignorance is absolute bliss. that is also then another difficulty which arises when it comes to apportioning of accountability of group Kamma. Because within the Vinaya, it is said, it is a responsibility of the monk or the nun to know what the karma is. Hence, the transgression of the rule, not knowing the rule, is not an excuse that would prevent the person from the transgression of the rule. Do you understand the point? Right? If the person, for example, if the person has not studied, does not know that he has entailed a parajika offense, which now completely wipes out his monkhood, an excuse to say, okay, I was not aware, is not an excuse. And when it comes to something as powerful as a parajika kamma, kamma is the transgression. That is law. It is at the moment the mind arises, meaning the kamma arises, that the monkhood now fails to continue. Do you understand? Right? So that is why we always connect Vinaya to Kamma. Right? Vinaya to Kamma. Let's go on and see. Now, right, now, national Kamma, Tibet. Now, we know what happened in Tibet, don't we? Right? We've read the news. It still goes on in the news. There have been associations that has come up with, Save Tibet and all of these, movements. I've taken this as an example. Tibet, I've used the word liberated by the Chinese in 1950, provides an interesting case of group Kamma. Why? If we take the country as a whole, however, it would be difficult to explain what a nation could have done that it should deserve losing the independence it once enjoyed, except, of course, by way of history and politics, right? However, if we look at the Tibetan Sangha, which was one of the primary reasons for the Chinese acquisition, Tibetan Sangha, or the Sanghas as a conglomerate, it could be explained Kamma-wise why Tibet fell to the Chinese and that they felt the brunt of political change. What happened? What did Tibet do? What did Tibetan Sangha do? What happened was, could it be that the conglomerate negative Kamma began accumulating since the 11th century with the instituting of the law of the rule of incarnation? Have you heard of this? The rule of incarnation, right? Unprecedented. This was the first time in world Buddhist history that the law or the rule of incarnation was used, right? From any Sangha all around the world. What was this? What is the rule of incarnation? This by Franz Michael was quoted as an ingenious innovation of religious politics, right? Now, this began, right, from the Dusum Keyampa, the first Karmapa, head of the Karma Kyagu sect, and was quickly adopted by all other Tibetan Buddhist sects. The rule of incarnation is where they took authority away from the leading families and turned it over to the monks of the various sects. And that created the uniquely religio-political order of Tibet, ruled by incarnation, 1982, right? Now, this is where the religious leader is also the leader of state, and the religious leader is then determined by the rule of incarnation, that is the incarnation of that religious leader through the ages, right? through the ages, which is quite sort of, given the word, is quite obvious. The sect itself soon became the power base of a family that proclaimed its own teachings, was superior to those of all the other sects. Although in reality, there was no doctrinal diversion amongst the sects. Doctrinally, they were very similar, almost too similar. Occasionally, we still get reports of rival claims and power struggle within the Tulku sect system, right? Now, this is an example of group Kamma that we can derive from the modern world, right? From the modern world. Now, personal contemplation, which I've added. Whenever religion and politics mix, power struggle and worldliness are the rule, right? Become the rule. The rise and fall of Buddhism as a state religion in China, in Korea, and in Japan clearly follow the fortunes of those dynasties and elites who patronize Buddhism. When the wheel of Dhamma, Dhamma Chakra, is turned into a wheel of power, Ana Chakra, the consequences are quite dire. Right? The Buddha has quoted this. There have been many texts which quote the same. You should not use religion within a political mix. And we have enough evidence in the world with regards to history which claims the same. I have included some of these examples to draw clarity on the dire circumstances that could arise out of such a mix. Now, is group Kamma consistent with justice? Accountability is the question. The degree of merit or demerit often depends both on the action of the group as well as the action of the individual participants. Is that clear? Right? Now, remember what we earlier read, the second slide of today's session, right? It is not a singly linear process. It is affected by many conditions. And what is appropriated to you is your most appropriate karmic experience, dependent upon the conditions that you put yourself into. Let us say, the example that we can quote out of the Buddha says that a monk, a person focused, not only a monk actually, a person focused upon the path of practice should not fall into the company of thieves, not because the monk or the practitioner is a thief. Basically, the monk or the practitioner can be a very pious person. However, should the person be within the company of thieves, the fault or the karmic appropriation, fault appropriation by law can fall onto the holy man. Do you understand? Right? Now, let's talk about legal side of it, meaning the law side of things, and just focus on the karmic side because that is obviously what we are here to do, right? Karmically, when the holy man, I'm going to call him a holy man, but understand that it is a monk or lay person, when the holy man is within the company of thieves or within the company of those who blame can come too easily, the karmic conditions that are present for the further nurturing of unwholesome karma or the blooming or fruition of personal unwholesome karma increases. Do you understand? Right? Hence, reducing the conditions present for wholesome karma to come about. Right? For wholesome karma to come about. Being within a den of thieves can also bring out latent tendencies that one might have connected to stealing, right, in one past life and now give fruition. So, two things happen now. The conditions for unwholesome reduces and dies away. The conditions for unwholesome karma arises, past latent tendencies, hence giving fruition. Is that clear and understood? Right? This person's karmic consequences would depend to a large extent on how he psychologically responds to the situation, which can be a very difficult task to understand. Because as we understand already, if we have studied Abhidhamma, if we have meditated and have some experience on the area, we know how difficult it is to sometimes keep track of our minds. Sometimes before we reject something, we accept it even for a split second of a moment, and then we reject it. But the attraction can be quite powerful in terms of the javana experience or the impulsive experience within the mind process, that karma compared to the rejection karma can be quite powerful. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Right? Because now in marketing, in neuromarketing, there is a stance where now, you might have heard, the usage of neurolinguistics in the process of selling, right? In the process of promoting consumption within societies. This is a thing which happens, right? For example, if you would take a Coca-Cola ad, now this is public forum, I'm not afraid to mention it. If you take a Coca-Cola ad, now, of course, we've all drunk out of a can of Coca-Cola. You shouldn't be, but we've all done it because it tastes so good, regardless. Now, on an advertisement of Coca-Cola, the mouth, or where you sort of open the can, in the advertisement, the mouth has a smiling face, or is sort of adjusted as a smiling face to bring out the sense that if you drink, now it's not saying it in any way, but what it is saying is that if you drink Coca-Cola, you're going to be happy, right? If you drink Coca-Cola, you're going to be happy. In a Burger King, in a Burger King commercial, or was it a McDonald's commercial? Within the burger, right, where the lettuce is, there's lettuce in the Burger King burger and the McDonald's burger. And I can't remember which commercial it was. It was either of the two. There was a very small $1 bill in the lettuce, right? They had photoshopped it into the lettuce. We do not realize it. Only if you look at it, you see it. But what the neuro message that it gives is, from with $1, you could buy this, or this is so cheap, right? Now, in that process, right? In that process, if we go on to sort of see the psychological ways that we are conditioned to act, now that flows down. We do not realize that, but that is also karma. Because that is intention and the building up of intention. And now the scary part of neuromarketing is the fact that we didn't want it in the first place, right? But we were made to believe that we wanted it, right? Similarly, we are not hateful in the first place, but we are made to hate. We are not lustful in the first place, but we are made to lust in a similar way, right? This is an area of concern, especially when it comes to the karmic energies that we develop. The crucial point here is that if the individual had no intention to perform the deed, he cannot be held culpable, right? That is a point to remember. Group karma is possible in the sense that an individual or a group can bring a karmic condition that, due to personal affinity, mental connection, and propinquity, that is social connection, brings about the results. We connect, or the connection between the personal and the social. That is when the result becomes most powerful. Because remember, in the Patisandhi process, Without the action of it, there is no patisandhi karma, right? It has to go the full circle, brings a result that affects all or most of the group in a similar manner. However, although the overall karmic result may be seen almost uniform, the exact reactions of each individual of the group are rarely the same at any moment in time. We are individually unique as a society, right? There is no proof in any way to say, or it cannot be that any individual, any two individuals can have the same reaction mentally. It is always different because the conditions available to us are different. And that is one of the main threats to the concept of group karma. However, the karmic resultants can be quite similar, like the examples that we discussed in the earlier session, right? In the earlier session. Now, this monk is one of the most educated monks in Thailand, right? He's a very, very well-known educated monk. Now, what are his thoughts on group karma? In his book about the influence of karma, the social influences of karma is the book, right? He makes this claim, or he attributes Samadhi Pacha to group karma. How does he do it? The support for right view Pacha, which is a part of the Patthana, is Parato Gosa, which is a sound, external sound. Here it's said as another voice, but it's an external sound, right? And then wise attention, Yonis Manaskara. Without, even if you have another sound but no Yonis Manaskara, Samadhi will not be fulfilled, right? You must have both another's voice and wise attention for the Samadhi to be fulfilled in terms of Samadhi Pacha, or the support or dependence of Samadhi. Now, Paratho goes, in other words, refers to the social ambience or external factors that influence or shape our lives. Now, that is connected to group karma, according to Venerable Payutto's claims. Right? Do you understand where that draws parallels? Because the external ambience found in the environment that we live, or the places that we work, or the places that we have ordained at, right, creates the foundation for you to take up the thinking patterns of that place and reenact it through your own actions, right? Which is Parato Gosa, right? Which is Parato Gosa. Now, personal responsibility and social karma. Without wise attention, human beings are easily swamped by the negative influences of external factors, such as those of religious beliefs, traditions, and social values. Right? Now, this is very personal to all of us. We could say that religions, traditions, and customs are social karma, accumulated through the ages, and they in turn mold the thoughts and beliefs of the individuals or society. Payutto asks, that is clear. Take yourself back to when the people who are in their 60s, in their 70s, when you all were younger, if you were a girl, right, the things that you could or you were accepted to do was completely different from the men. That brought about different circumstances to the journey of life that you underwent, right? That you underwent. Now, how does a socially accepted view become personal karma? Personal karma, this is the hit on the nail. Personal karma arises at the point where the individual agrees to the values of society and its leaders. The key term, agrees. How can one agree? Agree does not necessarily have to mean that you go and shout at the top of a platform, right? Or that you had to voice it. Acceptance in any way or form will go down to agreement, right? Now, let us say, now, in Sri Lankan culture, or Asian Eastern culture, right, going or visiting a guru, a sadhu, a shaman, sadhus are not monks, by the way, a shaman, these people before marriage or before an auspicious event, right? Now, you understand with your logical, intelligent brain that this might not be completely accurate, right? Some people do it, but they also have doubts, but they do it to fulfill, other people, maybe even themselves, whatever. Let's say a person doesn't do it because he wants to be a rebel, right? Wants to be a rebel. So gets the daughter or the son married without checking the horoscope, for example, which is a very Eastern practice, right? Which is a very Eastern practice. Now, at some point down the line, should the marriage not work out, and there is, of course, a very high chance that the marriage will not work out, because obviously 56% of the world population of married couples end up in divorce. So there is more than half, 50%, 56% chance, to be very exact, that the couple will end up in divorce, right? So let's say at that point, what happens? At that point, the person who chose to be the rebel now says, I should have checked the horoscope. Do you understand? That is also now participating in the greater social culture, now contributing to it as well, right? Now contributing to that social Kamma as well, right? So it can be quite a difficult position to hold, even if you held it in the first place, because we are social beings and we are conditioned through social means, right? So that becomes the moment that one agrees, that now builds up as the Kamma, right? But here, more than the aspect of the individual aspect of Kamma, this sets the vibration, the standard for previous or the Kamma of the environment to be so, right? Now, for another example might be a woman belongs in the kitchen. I'm not saying that. I'm just quoting history, right? How unpleasant it might be, isn't it? Right now, right? Now, a girl who does not like this, obviously, right? But feels powerless at the brunt of that social vision for the woman or for the girl, right? Now, in any way agreeing to it also supports the aspect of social Kamma. Giving it leeway or saying, oh, I have nothing to do, is not an excuse. Apparently is not an excuse. So do you see the danger of samsara, really? Because there is no way out. The samsara is such that it makes you, if I use it's kind of corners you into a position where you can't do anything otherwise, right? Now, moving on. Now, the Mula Sutta. Greed, hate, delusion is unwholesome, bhikkhus. Whatever the greedy, the hateful, the deluded constructs through the body, through speech, through the mind, that too is unwholesome. The greedy person his mind overcome and consumed by greed. The hateful person, his mind overcome and consumed by hate. The deluded person, his mind overcome and consumed by delusion, wrongly inflict suffering on another by killing or by holding or by incurring losses or by blaming or by banishing, thinking, I am powerful. This is for the sake of power. That too is unwholesome. So really, what that, according to the Mula Sutta, what it truly says is that regardless of the intention of the action, let us say even the fact of I am doing this to protect my country itself is regardless, there is still an wholesome karma. There is only the possibility of reducing the unwholesome karma. I'm sorry, did I say wholesome karma? I meant unwholesome karma, right? There is only the possibility of reducing the unwholesome karma. There is no way of escaping it, right? There's no way of escaping it. And again, the danger of samsara, right? Thus, these many evil, unwholesome states born of greed, caused by greed, arising from greed, conditioned by greed, are born of hate, caused by hate, arising from hate, conditioned by hate, are born of delusion, caused by delusion, arising from delusion, conditioned by delusion, conditioned by delusion. I think that other part is typo. If such a leader's supporter thinks that he will himself enjoy such power and greatness, that delusion worsens his unwholesome power. My God. You know, these nowadays, the reason that we vote for a specific political party, especially if you're in business, is because of the favors that you could possibly ask and the rate of commission that you could possibly pay less because of the initial political help that you would have afforded to party instead of coming into power. Now you see, regardless when such a decision is made, regardless of whether you are now a part of the political party or not, or whether you are just running a hopper's shop by the street corner, you are part of the karma. You are part of the problem. This is a very important part. And, you know, I wish we had the time, but if we go through this in great detail, actually these sorts of texts in great detail, what it completely offers is a management structure, procedure, and process. Kamma of religions, my God. The Kamma of religions, my God. I'm sorry, I said my God. It's just habit. Okay, the Kamma of religions. Now, this list was way too long, so I, kind of like edited it out and just took some, right? So this list speaks about all the, in the Pope's speech made publicly, which the Pope asked for forgiveness for, right? The persecution of the Italian scientist and philosopher Galileo Galilei in the trial of 1633, the Catholic involvement in the African slave trade, the church's hierarchy's role in the burnings at the stake of descendants, and the religious wars that followed the Protestant Reformation, the injustices committed against women in the name of Christ, the violation of women's rights, and for the historical denigration of women, inactivity and silence of some Catholics during the Holocaust, the execution of the Czech reformer Jan Hus, Pope and anticipated Reformation, the sins of Catholics throughout the ages for violating the rights of ethnic groups and peoples. We are in that group, by the way. And contempt for their cultures and religious standards. We are also in that. And public mass of pardons. The sins of crusader attacks on Constantinople in 1204. Missionary abuses in the past against indigenous peoples of South Pacific, the massacre of Aztecs and other Mesoamericans by the Spanish in the name of the church. Now, these are clear outlines of where the Pope publicly apologized. But let us not be sort of happy about the apology, because the apology was not an apology which was made from the people who are affected by these heinous crimes. The apology was made or requested by God. So, which is quite a funny clip that you can actually see on YouTube, where the Pope actually does not ask for forgiveness from the people, the Pope asks for forgiveness from God. Now, moving on, we are not in any way new to this fact of religious harm is not in any way new to this world. The disruption of Buddhist philosophy in India, wholly attributed to the incoming or the takeovers from the Muslim invasions, the burning of the Nalanda library, all of these things attribute to religious Kamma. Also, unfortunately, even Buddhists, in terms of what happened with the Uyghur Muslims, what happened in Burma with regards to the way that the Muslims were treated at the border of Bangladesh, India. The Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, we are all the Hindus, any sort of organized religion has this karma that it has faced, right? Which is the doing of action proportioned or advised by the heads of those religions. Hence, the plight of those karmas are often felt by people generations along the beliefs. We still see wars between the Jewish people, the Catholics, the Christians, the Muslims, the Buddhists, the Hindus, all of these things which have started decades and maybe even some, in certain instances, thousands of years ago, and still they continue, and the people still are affected by it. Certain public forum extracts that I have mentioned here, the apparent results of those actions that I have quoted here, which is also public forum, is the rapidly dwindling church-going population worldwide. We know in the UK, churches are now being rented out for parties, for restaurants, sold and bought, really. It is a really dwindling amount of people. The amount of people going to churches are really reducing, owing to all of that which is coming out because of course, social media, the internet, and all of that. People are more aware of what is going on behind closed doors, especially in the West. People are better informed of the church history, much tainted by intolerance, blood, and violence. And they tire of its paternalism and their downplay of personal responsibility. Right, downplay of personal responsibility. We see this also with certain Buddhist sects in the UK, which have really downplayed. We assume that covering up is the best form of justice, which according to Buddhism, the laws of karma, it is not so, right? It is not so. Growing number of Christian sects and churches, when a system is word-based instead of Buddhist wisdom-based, it depends on how you interpret the words. Understandably, here the latter is the truth, is destroying its spirit. Now, this happened in India with regards to Buddhism as well, right? And we now experience the results of those karmas right now in Sri Lanka, because when the libraries, the Nalanda libraries and all of the major Buddhist monasteries were burned down, Buddhism as a religion, because it is an atheistic religion, we did not believe in a God. God was not important to us. But what we laid our trust upon was the doctrine and the practice. Now, most of the scholars were killed. Most of our literature was burned. So at one time, We had the structures and foundations of Buddhism were so weak that Buddhism reduced to mantras and astrology and all of these sciences, which we still find in Sri Lanka, right? Now that is then those aspects. Remember, because of the invasions, Buddhism might have suffered. However, the Buddhists are then responsible for the karmas that they generate on their own after the invasion as well. That is the result of the karma that we are going through. Where one sect would say one thing, another sect would say another thing, one other monk would be, doing Vaskavi at a Devale, all of these things. It is almost so that, the crux of it has been affected. And now we find people sort of arguing about what the truth is, right? Something which was at one point so structurally stable. The widespread exploitation, abuse, and perversion of the minds and bodies of believers, belief in Satan and demons, and often the basis of psychosis and various psychological problems. Celebrate monasticism, an idea not found in the Bible, puts a heavy toll on those of the cloth who have unresolved personal issues, so that the abuse of children and sexual misconduct are more widespread and serious than the church would dare to admit, right? Would dare to admit. We have this problem in all religions, even in Buddhism, unfortunately, and it is something that that is very, very concerning when it comes to the hierarchy and patriarchy of concerning religions. Now, contra group Kamma. Now, all of those Kammas we find, when committed and done, affects an entire nation. The only way that people find themselves out of group karma of a social proportion, right, is essentially for the responsibility to befall not only the king, but everyone. Imran Khan says this beautifully, right? If you remember Imran's speech at the Oxford Union on when he was asked, how do we tackle corruption? He beautifully says, corruption cannot be tackled at one tier of society. Every tier must take responsibility to overcome corruption. Only then can we do it. Only then can we do it. If you are paying, in the East, if a policeman is to stop us and we pay the policeman off, right? You are a part of the problem as well, right? And that responsibility must fall upon everyone. Why I say the East is because it happens more often in the East than I would hear in the West, right? Where you would pay a policeman off to get out of a ticket, right? Right. Now, contra group Kamma, we are almost at the end. Evil group Kamma, when the village dwellers together deprive a pig or deer of life, their intention has only another's life faculty as object, right? Read carefully, there's a very important point here. Yet, that karma is diverse even at the moment of their accumulating it. For amongst them, one acts purposefully with care. Another acts because he is pressed to do so by others. Thus, come, you do it too. Another goes about without preventing it. Without preventing it. Right? Without preventing it. Now, there is an important part here with the relation that draws contra kamma into the life faculty as object. Right? My Abhidhamma students take notes. Right? Now, when it comes to kamma, kamma operates by way of constant genesis, isn't it? Kamma, vipaka, gives leeway for future kammas to further produce itself for results. Life faculty has a very similar function or process, which is continuity of genesis, right? Continuity of existence, right? So when we come down, for example, when we come down to a material form, right? A material form, when it arises out of kamma, a kammaja rupa has to, a kammaja rupa by element, kamma is to produce and keep on producing. By spirit of kamma, without life faculty, a kammaja rupa cannot arise, right? Because kammaja rupa allows for the agenda of the kamma to be fulfilled. Do you understand? Right? The agenda of the kamma can only be fulfilled when supported by life faculty, whose responsibility is continuity. Right? So when we say life faculty, we want the person's continuity to stop. That is death, defined. Right? If you want to harm a person, let's say, cut a limb off or something, I'm just being graphic just to make it so clear, right? If you just want to harm a person or to threaten a person, right, without the intention to kill, right, then the kamma would be different from the need to kill, to discontinue the life faculty, which means to discontinue the continuity of life, right? The continuity of life. Here, amongst them, one is reborn. Now, this talks about the variation. A group of people can be performing the same deed or within a group that performs the deed. But the mind setup and conditions available for each person can be different. Hence, amongst them, one is reborn in hell by that same kamma, another in an animal womb, another in a ghost realm, right? In a ghost realm. The commentary goes on detail how the Buddha can know in these cases in which subhuman realm each individual would arise and how each will fare differently from others. Now, this is not a knowledge that even Venerable Sariputta or Moggallana would have. It is only something that the Buddha's intellect is able to comprehend. I mean, even if you think for yourself, right? For yourself, maybe a loving person in your family has passed away, and you try to assume what really went on. Even that creates a bit of a headache, isn't it? Right? The complexity of kamma resultant and conditions for kamma is such that the complexity does not allow for a normal human or normal enlightened brain to comprehend its complexity. Right? And among these kinds of karma, he stands that this karma will not be able to bring about rebirth, being weak. The Buddha is the only one who can define karma to say this karma will bring rebirth, this karma will not bring rebirth. Right? This karma will not bring rebirth. Then we have the good karma. Likewise, when the village dwellers together give alms food, the intention of this has only alms food as object. Yet that karma is diverse in the manner mentioned earlier, even at the moment of their accumulating it. Amongst them, some reborn in the heavenly world, some reborn in the human world. The commentary goes, only the Buddha can say where, when, why, how this karmic complexity goes on, and it is only the Buddha who can say that this good karma brings about rebirth, this good karma doesn't. And this is found in the Vibhanga, right? This is found in the Vibhanga. So the conclusion to which we can arrive is the fact that group Kamma can be so only when it is done with a similar mindset and a shared mindset. However, group Kamma is merely a construct, a concept to help nations, societies to do wholesome good together for the prosperity of themselves, their children, their generations, and the nation as a whole. Right? Group Kamma, in other words, is merely a concept, not a true reality. The concept of group Kamma is useful as a social discourse, as it facilitates a sense of common responsibility and concerted effort, consented effort. Such a conception to extend the musical simile mentioned is like an orchestra. Each instrument has its score to play and produces a unique range of beautiful sounds, but together the sounds create beautiful music. Or conversely, badly conducted, it produces badly music. In other words, the notion of group Kamma is a useful, social, skillful means of facilitating more people to generate wholesome Kamma, or create an environment conducive for wholesome Kamma. In fact, this is the line taken by various concerned and engaged Buddhist individuals and groups. Another word for this positive interaction, as we have noted, is a true-hearted friendship, a friendly and fruitful fellowship of pilgrims journeying towards an awakening. The point is that a healthy group or society begins with healthy individuals. And that is the end. So that is the conclusion to which we bring group Kamma. Group Kamma has been elucidated in a way to bring about the notion that when a nation, a society, a group of individuals act with wholesome volitions of heart, the results and the benefit to that same group or community or individual is of a similar grasp. However, if it is otherwise, it would be otherwise. This is to motivate the societies, the communities as a whole, to bring forth the importance of values, bring forth the importance of ethics, bring forth the importance of compassion-based ruling in a world to benefit those living in the world in its entirety, right? In its entirety. The moment that we live and conduct ourselves selfishly, this is where we will find ourselves. This will find ourselves in sort of diplomatic conflict or international conflict and wars. Most of these wars could have been avoided, that we find today, could have been avoided and prevented should we have acted on more compassionate and equality grounds. Even if we are to take the map of the world, we know the map that is often used in our schools, in our classes, and the map that we often see is not a true representation of the world that is. Right? For example, if you would take Sri Lanka is attributed a very, very small area to what it actually is. The map is larger towards the Western countries, Russia, that whole sort of span of Europe, America, Canada, they are very large. And Asia has been now reduced to a very small. This is to affect the mindset. Now you see how that has created conflict in the world, how that has disproportionately affected people and the opportunities available to people, right? There is a whole spectrum of Buddhist and wholesome leadership and values which have been taught. And this is not just Buddhist, this is wholesomeness, right, just, and good governance, which has been stated by the Buddha and the Buddhas before him as well, right? So this brings our group Kamma session to an end. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, you're most welcome to ask a question. LK, you have a question, LK? Okay, maybe not. Anyone else who would have a question of any sort? Lovely. So then we will draw the session to a close. And thank you very much for joining. And thank you very much for joining. And thank you very much for your time. I hope this session gives you inspiration to work within your own communities, your own families, to spread the word of happiness, peace, equality, and of course, most importantly, metta, loving kindness for all. Right? Take care and have a wonderful rest of the day.